Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful Seward, Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. Audience, I have a little riddle for you today. What do Elton John, Whoopi Goldberg, and the intersection of Grand Avenue and Victoria in St. Paul have in common? They're all EGOTs.
What? Wait a minute. Ian, I think you've got that wrong. It is the East Grand Avenue Overlay District. EGAOD. So it's actually much less crisp and roll off the tongue. No one really knows how to shorten it properly. Yeah, the struggle is real.
So Sherry Johnson, you are here right now because you produced an episode for us about the East Grand Overlay District. So can you tell us a little bit about this? Like, why do we care about this right now in particular?
Yeah. So this district has been in place from about 2005-ish, way back when Summit Hill Association was working with the business district there, and they put on this extra layer of land use protection. Now, at the time, there was a lot of good reasons for this. They were seeing a lot of different commercial corridors be overrun by national brands, including, things like McDonald's, and I think a lot of folks just wanted to retain that small local business flavor as well. They didn't want.
I bet they were probably seeing what was going on in Uptown and kind of trying to avoid that.
Almost certainly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was just a lot of concerns and people trying to maintain a flavor and maybe doing some unintended consequences. But over time, there's been kind of a difference in between the east part of Grand Avenue and the west part of Grand Avenue. And the reason we want to care about this is right now, of course, everywhere we look, we're looking at relaxing different land use policies and the impacts of doing that. Maybe they've gotten a little constricted over time. And we've got a lot of folks, too, who are really worried about the future of our commercial corridors, our mixed use corridors in cities like ours. So it's just one of those wonderfully nerdy land use things that maybe has an outsized impact than what we realize when we're just walking up and down the street and asking, why does it look like this?
Yeah. So speaking of how nerdy it is, you went and interviewed a City of St. Paul employee who works in, which department is he in? Okay,
so Spencer Miller Johnson is a newish planner to the City of St. Paul. And he works in planning and economic development, that department in St. Paul.
So yeah, for listeners who enjoyed our pothole episode with a couple of road engineers, this is going to be right up people's alley.
Yeah, and I think my biggest regret with this interview is not asking the question, well, why just not remove the overlay entirely? Mm-hmm. Why is it even there?
So yeah, let's jump right into that interview, and folks will hear from us in the present a couple of times.
Spencer. Good
Hi,
morning.
Sherry. Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on the Streets podcast. What's your background? What brought you to St. Paul?
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My background is I grew up in the Twin Cities, so I had to, come back, as so many people do. I'm one of the Minnesotans that moved away and returned, and I'm happy that I did that. I think a lot of people think that they're going to move away and never return, but I think this place has a way of just bringing people back, and I think that's a good thing. So I went to California for about 10 years. I went to Cal Poly, and then I stayed there, worked in a couple different firms, one in the Bay Area and one on the Central Coast, and both were really rooted in long-range planning, transit-oriented development, affordable housing, urban design, and toward the end I did a lot of form-based code work. And so
and we're going to talk about that
I'm
today.
excited to. Yeah. That's my bread and butter. So so that's where I came from. And then just, 2-3 years ago, moved back here. I really wanted to work at the City of St. Paul, so I'm really glad that the timing worked. And now, of course, I'm back by family and friends. So that's always a bonus too.
Nice. All right, so we actually brought you here to talk about the East Grand Avenue overlay study, and it's out for public comment through March. Before we get into the study, though, could you just give us a primer on St. Paul Code? Like, what are the existing zoning districts that impact all of Grand Ave, broadly speaking?
Sure. Absolutely. So, obviously in St. Paul, we have our zoning code. It has a variety of zoning districts that apply throughout the city. There are probably, I think, 5 main categories that we organize the zoning districts into. So we've got like residential, we have business, which is essentially like commercial zoning. We've got traditional neighborhood, which is kind of like mixed use zoning, and we have others. On Grand Avenue, there are several zoning districts that apply. On East Grand Avenue in particular, there are 9, I believe. And the most predominant are what's called the RM2, which is a medium density, a multifamily residential zone. And then we've got kind of a mixed bag of business districts. So those commercial districts, one of the most unique of those is called BC, Community Business. And that was written, I believe, for Grand Avenue to do a good job of maintaining those house scale buildings for commercial uses. So make it flexible for land use kind of variety in existing house scale form. And we see that in businesses on Grand, like the Irish on Grand, or there's the bookstore, there's Mischief Toys.
Right.
So,
our readers will be very familiar with Mischief Toys. One a good example of how to use that space. Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, those are the kind of main factors. And then, of course, in the zoning code, we have a variety of general building design standards, too. We've got landscaping standards, fencing, the stuff that just applies regardless of the development as well. So we've got base zoning districts, and then we've got general standards, too.
Got it. And so what's a zoning overlay, and how is it different from underlying zoning?
Yeah, an overlay applies on top of all of that. So it's an additional regulatory layer that usually is written into code for some sort of special reason. So it might be, you're next to the river, or there's some sort of environmental protection requirement, or historic preservation. So usually overlays are there for a specific geographic area because that geographic area warrants some special treatment.
Got it. Okay. So the study, you just went through this process of studying this East Grand Avenue overlay district. It was put in place in what,
2006.
2006. And it was brought on by the neighborhood organization, the district council. So what brought on this study of this overlay, and what was your process?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of factors that brought this on. They include some staff concerns on comp plan consistency. We're aware of East Grand Avenue Overlay District is the only overlay in the city that kind of applies in this way that's corridor specific and has development limitations placed. So we're aware that that doesn't totally jive with the comp plan. Where that really came about from, well, I guess that was really shown to us through the 695 Grand project process. It's now Kenton House. It's now built, and we've got a number of people living in there, and we've got 2 businesses that are in there. But when that project first started, or came to us as an application a few years ago, it really showed PED that there was a mismatch between the code and the comp plan, because we found ways to support it through comp plan policy, but our code didn't directly allow for it, and the project required a lot of variances, conditional use permits from the code. For some of those reasons were valid. It is a large project, and it definitely necessitated an additional level of review, but it did show us that it's still a quality, walkable, pedestrian-oriented project that makes sense on a place like Grand. So why is the code such a barrier? And that's really what inspired us to want to take this zoning study on.
So part of that process, too, was about the Grand Avenue Advisory Committee. So our very own Dan Marshall was on this thing. Zach Farrell was on this thing. Sometimes some of our friends out there in Streets MN land. What was that about? Tell us about how that contributed to the process.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the advisory committee was incredibly kind of instrumental to getting to where we are today. We it was really a group of 12 community members. They didn't all live like necessarily in Summit Hill, but close to Summit Hill. And some of them were business owners, some of them lived residents, homeowners, renters. It was a variety of folks, and by design, they had a variety of opinions. So, and that was something that we wanted to do because we wanted to get these people in the room to hash out some of these more challenging conversations about like what are the specific issues that get to you that really we need to try to solve in a way we can through zoning. I mean, zoning can only go so far, but what can we do to, help find some level of consensus? And I think they met 7 times. It was really led by a consultant, so we could have like an objective third-party person just figure it out. And they came up with this guiding principles document that they gave over to us. It listed,
and that's appended to the document that
yes, exactly. Yep, it's an appendix that we've carried forward into our staff reports, and it has 7 major principles and a variety of little kind of bullets underneath them. And it was hopefully somewhat healing for members of the community. I like cringe.
That's what I was hoping it would be.
I know, like I hope. I'm proud of where it ended up. Like it was, they came to some general agreement. I mean, there's still folks that really didn't want the heights to change in particular, but generally they were able to see that corners could facilitate higher intensity development, and maybe that higher intensity development shouldn't happen on mid-block areas closer to houses.
That was a huge thing. Yeah.
So treating like areas of Grand as like contextually, I think like was a key takeaway that I got from it. And, it was helpful to even get there. And we tried to write that into our standards, even though it's kind of hidden. It's not like we say corners must do this and mid-blocks must do this. If you look at the standards and you're a zoning geek, you can probably see how they're treated differently. And so that was by design.
Got it. And what did this study find? And how might it change things?
Well, the study found that generally, no shock to us, the overlay was inconsistent with many comprehensive plan policies. The limitations that it has as part of it were constraining development, and really there has been very little development on the eastern portion of Grand since it was adopted in 2006. And so there are a variety of factors to be blamed for that, but the overlay is definitely one of them, and that's the one that we have the most control over here in PED. So we wanted to, work on amending that. And that's really where we started. That was the kind of impetus for it.
Mm-hmm. And so the study recommends specifically, I think, 4 things? Can you go over those? Would you mind?
Absolutely. The overlay, it's small but mighty today, and our proposal to amend it is also small but mighty. Right now it imposes just a few limitations on development, like building square footage limitations, so you can only build a building of a certain size, and height story limitation. So those really kind of tamp down what can be built on lots. And so what we're proposing to do is to kind of replace those limitations with design standards for walkable, pedestrian-oriented development. We're really just proposing 3 things, and they are step backs, which would require a building of a certain height to step back a portion of the building facade further from the street. That helps to kind of decrease the perception of intensity as a pedestrian. We're proposing what we call building line frontage. So that would basically require and or allow flexibility for buildings to be built close to the street where it would make sense, and buildings to match existing house scale form that exists where that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then we're proposing to do a frontage element standard. And that builds on other standards in the code, but it basically just means like you need to have pedestrian-oriented frontages on the front of your buildings. So that could include additional windows. It could even be a porch. It could be a stoop. It could be a great, residential entrance to a larger building. There's a variety of ways to meet that. But the point is you need to have pedestrian-oriented elements on the front of your building.
Got it. That human scale stuff we like to talk about.
Human scale.
All right.
Exactly.
So if the study's recommendations are incorporated into the code,
we'll have the overlay and the underlying T2 zoning, the changed overlay. How will these two things continue to complement one another?
Yeah, so there's one clarification in that, I
Sure.
think. So we'll have the overlay, and the overlay, one thing I didn't mention yet, is that it subjects all development to T2 design standards.
Thanks. Yeah.
And that, so that's probably what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The T2 design standards, that's an abbreviation of traditional neighborhood, the second level of intensity, so T2. And we have this list of design standards in the traditional neighborhood zoning districts, and what we're saying is like those should all apply within the East Grand Avenue Overlay District. And that's there today. So those all apply already today. We're just carrying that forward. Underneath that layer is still all the underlying zoning districts.
Okay.
So we've got those business districts, RM2. There's some T. There's some traditional neighborhood districts. But there's, I think, 9 different zoning districts. And they all have their own requirements for height, setbacks. FAR, they control intensity, and they control how, the development envelope that can be built under. So our overlay standards are just kind of adding on to that a little bit.
So you said FAR. Can you define
Sure.
that for some of our folks?
Yeah, floor area ratio. It's basically a way of regulating development intensity that scales based off the size of a lot. So it's a ratio-based regulation. So you might be able to build double the square footage of a lot if the FAR is maximum 2. And maybe I'll stop there because I don't want people's eyes to gloss over. But the point is, it's a way of regulating development intensity.
Okay, so Sherry, let's take a pause here for a second because I'm looking at a map here of like Grand Avenue, and there's a lot of different zoning categorizations across the whole thing.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that Grand Avenue would have one consistent zoning. No, that's not the case.
No, that would have been nice when I was looking at it and doing all the work on it. Yeah, no, it's unkind. My favorite is the BC zoning, which is those like little like houses with big porches, cute houses with big porches that have all the stuff in front of them. And you see Mischief Toys using that space really well. It's basically a conversion where it's an old house converted into a business, BC zoning. And it was essentially designed probably so that folks weren't tearing down these pretty, beautiful 2 and 3 story fun houses, and they were still able to run a business out of them. Seasoned is another one. There's a whole bunch as you go up and down Grand that you notice, and you don't really see that zoning in a lot of other places. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I'm zooming out on the map, and I do not see that same shade of gray anywhere else in the city.
That's to make that Grand Avenue more affordable for new business owners to come in.
I'm also seeing some like B2 and B3.
So that's just the non-mixed use places where there's a small business and it's not necessarily an upstairs, downstairs, things like that. As far as I know, I don't have my resident zoning translator around. Shout out to Simon Tagioff, but I'm doing my best. And then Spencer also talks about T2. So the T2 zoning is kind of that traditional use maximum of 45 feet with a conditional use permit. And that's the part that the overlay was designed to kind of cut down a little bit. That's the tallest, most intensive development that was allowed on Grand and would be again. What the overlay said is, no, you're limited to 3 stories and 30 feet for commercial buildings, 3 stories and 36 feet for commercial residential, and then 3 stories and 40 feet for residential or institutional. So it just kind of hacked off that last few feet to prevent that sense of what they call massing, to bring in more light and sky and whatever, and make sure that those buildings stayed at a human scale. But of course, right. And you don't have to go far. Just Western and Selby, one of the taller buildings we have that are historic in a commercial corridor like this, a neighborhood corridor, is right there. The Blair
That's
Arcade
one of my
building.
favorite intersections in St. Paul. Yeah. It
Yeah,
feels
me
so
too.
cozy.
It feels wonderful. And you're not really missing the sky, right? And then if you live
Right.
in that place, if you've ever been, it has one of the most beautiful views in St. Paul from the top. And it
Mm-hmm.
has beautiful treatments on the outside. I think a lot of folks who really want to protect against massing and things like that I want to give them a shout out too. Like, I think they've got some legitimate concerns that we don't use the materials that we used to, right? If we're going to build a brand new building, a lot of times, developers really will cut corners or make it look cheap, or the brick won't look as earthy or whatever. Like,
Sure,
there's
sure.
some legitimate things that I think folks who like that historic feel are afraid of. And they use, I think, at least in my view, they use height, these height caps and massing caps as a way to control for that when you can't really control what a developer uses for materials.
Has the city considered a zoning study of Grand or other commercial districts?
Good question. We do mention that as it relates to, I think it's the study of potentially materials, colors, design. That was one thing that the advisory committee
Sure.
talked about. We currently in our work plan don't have a plan to do an additional study on Grand Avenue. We're really focusing on more transit-oriented studies going forward. So nothing on Grand specifically on the work plan, at least for 2024.
Got it. So the 2040 plan, you talked about this overlay study bringing this overlay in line with that 2040 plan. It refers to neighborhood nodes as well. So like Victoria and Grand, where I just caught the bus, is one example. Can you share more about what those are and how that interacts with these other designations?
Sure. Neighborhood nodes are, yes, defined in the comprehensive plan. They're basically areas of the city or intersections of the city that we expect to have additional development intensity. And that might be because they're extra transit oriented, like Victoria and Grand is a transit intersection. They might be extra pedestrian oriented, or they might be both. So they have additional levels of activity, and we kind of mapped them out in the comprehensive plan to help us, visualize where additional development intensity could go in the future. And it's really more of a visioning exercise. They're not regulatory, but they do help us if a zoning application comes through and it's within a neighborhood node and they want to, build a slightly taller building. It's just another reason we have to support a project.
Got it. Yeah. I know that when I originally saw, kind of looked at the code and I was looking at it with the neighborhood plan committee at District 16, or it was the Grand Avenue Task Force, we were noticing this neighborhood node. And we're like, what is that? And then some of the fears I heard around that and or excitements, let's be frank, is it possible that could ever be upped to T3?
Sure. Yeah, valid fear, valid excitement on both ends. On the city side, generally, no. We generally aren't proposing to proactively rezone neighborhood node areas to a more intense zoning district. But if a property owner owned property and they came to us with a zoning application for a rezoning and it was a higher intensity zoning district, because it's within a neighborhood node, that would be another reason for us to support that effort to rezone it to something higher. But we don't have any plans to go in and rezone those.
Okay, got it. A lot of folks are sensing a shift in language around Grand Avenue. The language a few years ago with some area elders is that it's a residential street with commercial amenities. And a lot of people are really passionate about that. But increasingly, I'm hearing it referred to as a mixed-use street. Is this shift in language just in my head?
No, I don't think it's just in your head. I think it's maybe just come into a normalcy, at least on the city side, to think of it as a mixed-use area. And that's probably directly in response to the fact that the 2040 Comprehensive Plan defines the area as mixed use. So one of the things the Comprehensive Plan does is groups areas of the city into different land use categories. And again, those help us kind of visualize where development should go and what type of development should be where. Mm-hmm. And Grand Avenue is categorized mixed use. A lot of Summit Hill is categorized urban neighborhood. So that's a very common development pattern in St. Paul is to have these urban neighborhoods in proximity to a mixed-use corridor. So Grand is one of those things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all new development on each parcel in Grand should be vertical mixed use. It just means that it should continue to be a corridor, an area where you can live and work or shop or, get a coffee all within walking distance to one another. So new development might just be residential. New development on Grand might just be retail, but it's in proximity, in walkable proximity to a variety of uses.
Is there any possibility that there might be a mixed use designation brought forward in the zoning code?
Well, we have one, and it's hiding underneath the name traditional neighborhood.
Okay, say more.
So our traditional neighborhood zoning districts are essentially mixed-use zoning districts. They allow a variety of uses in T1 through T4. They're not grouped based off of like a predominant land use category. And that's definitely by design. I mean, they are form-forward mixed-use zoning districts. They have design standards for walkability, and they are not specific in what land uses necessarily can be where. Now, there are different levels of intensity, and T1 to T4 definitely has differences in what land uses are allowed, but they vary. And the point is they kind of jumble them up and allow flexibility on land use.
Okay, so Sherry, this next section of the interview is about step backs. So I wanted to introduce us a little bit because most people have heard of setbacks, right? But not as many people know about step backs. So a setback is a zoning regulation that dictates how close to the property line the edge of a building can be, right?
Yeah, and setbacks allow us to do things like sidewalks and walkable amenities and bike racks and all of that. Yeah. And it is interesting to note that a setback doesn't have to just be like the minimum, right? It can also be the maximum. So we typically think of the city is not going to let me build my building right up to the property line. I have to be 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet back, whatever it may be. But the city can also say you can't be more than 10 feet away from the property line. Because, we all know that on a walkable street, someplace you want to be a walking corridor, you don't want the buildings 100 feet away from the sidewalk.
Right.
In this no man's land, right?
Yeah. So that's a fun little tidbit. And now let's get into what a step back is.
In the East Grand Avenue Overlay District proposal here, we are proposing to write a step back that would apply after 30 feet of height. So we're saying a building can be 30 feet high along the sidewalk, but after 30 feet, it needs to be stepped back so the building facade or the rest of the building mass can go higher, but it needs to be stepped back after 10 feet.
Does it say by how much?
Yeah, so that's that 10-foot mark.
Oh, okay. Got it. So the 10-foot step back is how much you have to step back, and the 30 feet is at what height you have to start that 10 feet. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, and that applies along Grand, that applies to all sides of the building, at least in our current proposal. So we're saying off of rear alleys too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and that's to offset development intensity for those houses that are often on the other side of the alley. Maybe they're accessed off of Lincoln or something on the south side of Grand. And we don't want buildings towering over those houses. And that's something that we heard in this advisory committee that we're trying to implement through our standards and be responsive to.
Right. Has anybody ever talked about that not being consistent all the way along the corridor? For example, on Summit Avenue, some of those lots are very, very deep, right? And so a step back at 30 feet, where you'd have to do 10 foot back, you're just doing it for a yard versus a carriage house or a house that's right near the back of a building. Has there been any consideration to modulating that a little bit? I've heard some folks be a little concerned about that.
That's a great question. I think that's something, as we are now rolling this out publicly, we're starting to hear a little bit more. Is
Sure.
Maybe a generalized step back provision isn't necessarily the right proposal to proceed with. Maybe there's opportunities to revise that. For that's a great point off of rear alleys that have different sort of treatments in the back. I mean, there is a lot of variety. So is there a way to calibrate that? And two, we don't want to preclude, there's some building types that could make sense to go above 30 without a step back. And so we don't want to be onerous to that sort of thing.
Okay.
So open to any feedback during this public review period. Please.
All right. Yay. All right. So the report on the study also argues that larger lots are treated unequally. This is from the larger lots are treated unequally and in a way that can be challenging to develop, unquote. So some folks who advocate for localism, small businesses, historic flavor, kind of like the idea of narrower frontages. They might be asking the question, why should we care about preserving or encouraging large lots? What would you say to that?
The overlay district is overly broad brush in its treatment of these limitations. It applies regardless of lot size, which makes sense in some ways, but the fact that it writes into regulation specific limitations on building square footage that do not scale based off of lot size is perceived to be a challenge from the city side. And as an example, we have the overlay currently, without our proposal being adopted, the overlay currently has a limitation on building footprint square footage of 25,000 square feet. So you can't build a building with a footprint larger than 25,000 square feet. And that applies to a lot that's 5,000 square feet. That applies to a lot that's 50,000 square feet. Our point is all lots should be treated equally. Like, we're not trying to say large lot development is the way to go. We're just trying to say the standards should be calibrated to the size of the lot, so like the right level of intensity is developed on a lot by lot basis. A broad brush square footage kind of threshold is not generally the way to write zoning standards because they don't account for the uniqueness of development considerations.
Yeah, got it. So I guess what comes to mind is there, if this were to go into effect, would there be any kind of rush to sort of consolidate smaller lots, for example? Is there a danger of that?
I think there's a danger of that now. I mean, I don't think that this overlay the amendments to this overlay would trigger any sort of windfall of lot consolidation. There's nothing that we're writing that would motivate that any more than what's out there now. And in fact, it could actually, just thinking about it off the cuff, like it could actually be mitigating some of that risk because we're no longer treating these, the development thresholds in this like broad brush way. We're releasing them from that. So we're saying now you defer down to the underlying zoning districts for a lot of these development controls, and those are all scaled based off of lot size, and they're just more calibrated anyway. So we're just kind of opening that flexibility up.
Gotcha. Thank you for answering that. It just came to mind. So the first floor activation is another thing I was thinking about when I was reading the report. It references first floor activation. The recent advisory committee for this study expressed a desire for, quote, transparent shop fronts. But let's be frank, we're seeing a lot of windows that are completely covered by opaque signage, drab paper. I mean, when I walk over by Whole Foods on Snelling and Selby, it just feels kind of sad. Is there a mechanism for planners to regulate first floor activation that maybe actually enhances walkability?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is kind of a tricky one that I think a lot of communities struggle with. It's like a lot of communities have or think of windows as activation and don't really know what to do when it comes to like opacity or like, can you actually see in? And it's kind of for good reason because that's something that's difficult to regulate, like especially at the zoning level. I don't know if I would recommend writing in, you can be whatever 50% opaque or something, or you can't, or it's just like that just like gets to this level of challenge for enforcement or understanding of what that even means. And so that whole conversation is kind of a tricky one. I will say that the way in which we can encourage activated ground floor spaces is there are a variety of answers to, and it's like not all about windows. Like it's like, I think there are so many ways that ground floors can be activated, and it could be a residential lobby that has a really great awning or like projection off of it with some benches and like a great street tree, in my mind could be active, or an office space that has people coming in and out and to go get coffee down the street. And even though it's kind of a quiet use back there, it's an office. It still is active, and as a pedestrian walking by it, it probably doesn't matter, like whether or not they have their blinds closed for a conference or not. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like there are probably ways to like activate that energy without like thinking about it only as transparency. And I think it just boils down to the fact that in these sort of walkable areas, like building form over land use is what we need to think about. It's just it's not all about like what's going on inside and how many windows there are.
This hesitation is kind of funny to me because like that is exactly what zoning is, right? Is like there's a lot of things that we dictate using zoning rules that we don't strictly have to dictate. Yeah. Right? And so it's like I don't see an inherent reason that this like whether or not windows are present on a particular part of the building. Like I don't see why that has to be off the table automatically.
I know. I think in a perfect world, I think we would tell all businesses, hey, you have to have windows at the ground level, and they have to have things in them, and they have to look nice, and you have to be able to see them. And you can't cover it with brown paper or, frankly, wrought iron or whatever, like, or chain link, or to protect your assets, right? And I think I got the sense from Spencer and a lot of the business groups that I follow is like, there's a real hesitation to tell a small business owner who is sometimes really successful, sometimes struggling to keep product, here's what you absolutely have to do with your window. I think that there's more in this world. There's carrots are more welcome than sticks,
Yeah, right? Yeah, very true.
Right. And I mean, you think about a place like Freewheel Bike on Grand that had, I think it was them that had a bike stolen out of their very beautiful, very clear window when they just opened. And I felt so bad for them. So I feel like, I do think a building should be a gift to a street. I do think business owners should really think about how they relate their business to the street. And honestly, my little localist heart wishes that we could have different rules for the big players with millions and millions of dollars, right? The fact that Whole Foods has brown paper over their windows at Snelling and Selby is criminal. It's criminal. And I wish we could make it criminal. But the fact is that, what are the follow-on impacts to other businesses who, maybe want to do some different things with their windows? It's a real conundrum.
And I do actually agree that, like, I don't think that we should be dictating whether or not a building has, like, windows on the ground floor, etc. Yeah. But, like, thinking about it in these terms of, like, oh, what should and should we not be dictating through zoning rules, like, brings me swinging hard in the other direction of, like, why are we dictating any of this, right? Like,
I think that's really where Spencer is coming from. I get the sense that he's part of that group that just wants to really relax. He wants us to build, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like we have safety regulations for buildings, right? There's particular materials that you can and cannot use to build a building because of, like, fire codes, and like how many egresses have to exist for residents, etc. Right? Like, those things are all well and good. Why are we going beyond that and telling people who want to build something somewhere, like, no, you can't, it's too tall? When it's like, we want to make it tall so that we can house a bunch of people in it.
Right. And I think folks who really, really want more business space, more housing, I think that is where some of that hesitation comes from, even regulating number of windows, what's in those windows, what they look like. So I think it's, for us walkability people and us, affordable housing people, more housing people, there are just trade-offs and tensions around all of these things. And we want to create what we call enabling constraints so people can build, but also safety constraints, and keep it at that kind of that level you were talking about.
Yeah. And like I'm not arguing that we should just completely go laissez-faire and like you can build whatever you want wherever you want. Yeah. I do think that it is good that we don't allow like heavy industrial use right next to, like people's homes. But other than that, it's like I think that we have gone way too far with like not allowing commercial uses near people's homes, because like, hey, commercial use is exactly what I need near my home.
And even things like small scale manufacturing, which these days are done at, without a lot of industrial toxins involved, things like 3D printing and cutting and things like that. I'd like to see more of that even in places like Grand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, since you talked about building form, let's go. So one of the things that kept coming up in my work around Grand and neighborhood planning was this idea about form-based codes as an alternative to conventional zoning. Could you talk about the difference?
Sure, I would be happy to.
Yeah.
Conventional zoning codes are based off of the separation of land use. So that's the predominant way that our country has developed over the past several decades. It's based off of zoning codes that put residential in one spot, commercial in another, and industrial somewhere else. And that was really in response to like the Industrial Revolution and pollution and the fact that like houses were being built next to, manufacturing polluters. Yeah. And like fair to be like, we need to change that. Obviously for public health, that needs to change, but like the overcorrection is like off the charts, and we've found that now, and especially in the past few decades, we're like, hold up, that's led to auto-oriented sprawl. Like you have to get in your car to go everywhere in many, many places in this country. Unfortunately, the Twin Cities, especially Minneapolis and St. Paul, are two places where you don't. Like you can bike and bus and get around fairly easily, but there's still room for improvement. Point is, form-based codes were a correction to that. So they really popped up in the 80s, 90s as saying, well, hold on, like a lot of the great walkable places in the world, you don't really think about the land use inside. You're enjoying your experience on an activated, walkable area because of what you're walking by, because of the building form. And so form-based codes were put in place. They regulate building massing in a more predictable way, building intensity, and they use some different tools in that department. And a lot of them have very specific menus of building types you can build and different types of frontages with even like measurements for like how big or small should the porch be. And some people perceive that as like way off the deep end, like a porch is a porch. But at the same time, there are developers building balconies that you can't sit on. Like you can just like barely lean off of. So it's like there is a way to like achieve the right level of regulation to encourage the right level of development. I think over the decades, as form-based codes are being like tested, there's opportunities for improvement. Is
there a city that you'd recommend we look at to see an example of that? I know some of our listeners are into this, right?
Absolutely. One of the most recent kind of award-winning form-based codes is in South Bend, Indiana. And it's obviously much smaller scale than St. Paul, but like it's not a bad model. And sometimes I like mental note that and be like, what does South Bend do? When I'm like looking at stuff. I mean, it's a good example of like a well-illustrated Midwestern form-based code with like the generally right level of standards. Now it's fairly new, so I think the testing is being done now. Like, how is development going? I don't know. I haven't checked on it, but it's not a bad example to look at.
I'm spelling out, what does South Bend do? WDSBD. That could be a bracelet, right?
Okay, yeah, I'll work on that.
Yeah, okay. So this also reminds me of Loci Consulting did a market study and retail node when I was on the Grand Avenue Neighborhood Planning Committee. And in their analysis and recommendations, they said, quote, instead of the overlay requirement, we recommend developing realistic design guidelines that reflect the neighborhood's desire to maintain the qualities of Grand Avenue while promoting the development of sustainable mixed-use space along the corridor. So, first of all, is that form-based code? Is it the same?
No, I would say that's different.
Okay.
That recommendation, the words design guidelines are like the takeaway for me from that. Like,
Sure.
do design guidelines along the corridor. And to me, that is very different than a form-based code. Like, a form-based code's adopted as zoning, it's regulatory, you have to do it. If you, just like, conventional zoning. Design guidelines usually float above a code and are like a reference document that are just guidelines, right? So like you should do them, you're supposed to, but
there's no enforcement
mechanism. But there's not, there's very little enforcement, if any. And I personally don't love them because like how do they help me? Really? Like it could be subjective. Like, you should do X, Y, and Z. You should do this color or this. It's like, let the architect design the building, man. Like, I'm just I'll help you with the building envelope, what you can do, how to get it right as a representative from the city. But I don't need the subjectivity of guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's really helpful. Okay. And then just for another level of nerdiness. So Grand Avenue has this underlying zoning and all these other zones and the overlay. It also has a special sign district. How does the sign district potentially relate to the 2040 plan and this study? Is it likely to be revised?
Signs. Yeah, we've heard that this sign district is a development constraint.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately, but likely more unfortunately, not unique to Grand. Like, I think there are many other corridors in the cities with these special sign districts that are all kind of treated differently, and we do need to figure out how to make this easier. But it is not part of the scope for this study. We're not looking at signage, so we're just looking at development envelope and the overlay, particularly in the zoning code.
But it's what you talk about on your coffee breaks for fun.
Oh, yeah, I guess if we have to. It's like, but I would say, like, for any, community members or business owners out there, like, look, if you want to, look at the sign district and let us know what you think are the problems with it. And I mean, that could help us, either figure out what to do with it or like inspire a study for signs that we just haven't, scoped out yet.
Okay, so Sherry, we're talking about a Grand Avenue sign district here.
Yes.
I have never heard of this before, and I don't know what this is about.
Well, Ian, you're in luck because that link to that will be in the show notes. It is a special Easter egg for the nerdiest of our nerds. Yes, since 2009, Grand Avenue has had a special sign district, and it was basically just designed that business signs, the signs that commercial folks use to promote themselves, have to focus on the business and not any particular product, and that they have to have kind of a particular look and feel. That it's largely design guidelines. Now, it does get a little annoying for some of our businesses to be able to file for permissions and things like that. But that is still in place. And this overlay study does not even touch the sign district. We kind of don't know what's going to happen with it. But it's a whole other level of stuff you have to do as a business owner.
Yeah. Because this is about the signs that you put on the facade of your building.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There's a lot of evidence that we need more housing of all types. So let's talk about that. Cities need more robust to tax base, particularly cities like ours with lots of non-taxable property. We know denser housing enables climate-friendly transportation, small business foot traffic. How might we achieve greater density on corridors like Grand without sacrificing that early 20th century aesthetic that so many people love?
Yeah, that is the like classic dilemma. I mean, and it's really the classic dilemma with so many zoning code amendments. It's like, how do we, the planners who wrote the East Grand Avenue overlay district thought they were doing it right, and like, and shout out to them for, implementing at the time what was the right tool to do what needed to be done in response to the community at the time. But like, clearly it's had impacts and that we're trying to correct. And I think that goes for like housing too. Like it's the overlay is limited housing. But elsewhere in the city too, like we're really at the citywide level trying to unpack the zoning barriers to any level of housing density, especially related to the neighborhood scale housing. And you'll see that in the recent, passage of the 1 to 4 housing zoning study and the amendments associated with that, opening up neighborhood scale housing across the city. And yeah, it's just about limiting zoning barriers, but balancing that with design standards in my mind. And that's what we're trying to do for the overlay district here. We're trying to find the right balance for limited zoning restrictions, but still enough to hold developers to a high level of walkable design that, Grand deserves and has.
Yeah, that is a great bridge to this question. So at a recent unpack conference, I got to hear Karen Perolik of Opticos Design. So she's a well-known advocate for missing middle design. And those words are repeated a lot in these conversations. She talked about how every building should be a gift to the street and suggested that form-based codes, pre-approved designs might be able to pave the way for smaller developers to reinvigorate places like Grand. Would these overlay changes plus existing zoning enable that kind of missing middle development where buildings are gifts to the street?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up Karen Perolik because, she's awesome. Opticos does great work. I never worked for Opticos, but the firm I did work for teamed with them all the time. And so
wow.
The Peroliks are great. Yeah, I know. It's small, nerdy, urban planning zoning world. But it's great. And, what they've done to make missing middle housing mainstream is fantastic. And that, again, really inspired us in St. Paul in the 1 to 4 housing study. So it has direct, correlation. But what we're proposing here in the overlay definitely doesn't do anything to preclude missing middle housing. I think the biggest indicator of missing middle housing opportunity and potential on Grand Avenue in particular just has to do with the underlying zoning districts, just like so many parts of our city. And the overlay on top of that wouldn't make it more difficult, in my mind, to build missing middle housing. The underlying zoning districts, again, some of them are a little more commercial based, so you likely wouldn't see missing middle there unless there is rezoning, but we have the RM2 zone and we have some T zoning, so missing middle could go there. I'm happy to be transparent about one of my concerns that keeps me up at night, though, about this overlay.
Yeah.
This step back requirement, we kind of talked about it earlier, and we talked about, like, should it be like a little more calibrated? I was thinking about that in the context of missing middle housing, and there are several missing middle housing types that typically go taller than 30 feet with no step backs, and only up to like 40. Like, I'm talking like triplexes, what's called like a multiplex, so whatever, like 6, 8 units or whatever in a building.
Is there one like that over by Kowalski's? I want to say,
yeah, there is. And then of course there's some like right on Dale and Grand on the south corner that are pretty tall, and but they're existing precedent that I think people are used to and like, and they house people in a really kind of beautiful way. And so I've been thinking about the step back requirement a little bit more, and I'm glad it's out for public review and we're starting to hear the feedback, because I still support it. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially for larger scale development, to offset the perception of intensity, right? For like vertical mixed use, that's more of like the block scale. But it keeps me up at night a little bit. Like, hey, is this going to preclude anything on missing middle housing? Because I don't want that.
So it sounds like you might want some more feedback.
I would love feedback on that. Like, think about it, folks. Like, what's the deal? And we have an opportunity to revise this. I mean, so this is exactly the type of conversation we should be having.
Great. Okay. So we've had this big discussion. You've talked about a million things. Thank you so much for getting nerdy with us. What are the next steps in determining what happens with the recommended changes?
Yeah, well, we are in the public review period. I think we've mentioned that. So that started when the Planning Commission supported issuing this for public hearing on March 29th, and that triggered this public review period of about 6 weeks. So we're currently there. People are more than welcome. Please reach out to me with any written testimony. You can email me directly to submit written testimony on this project.
And we'll put your email in the show notes.
Fantastic. Good, because it's long, because I haven't made the last name, and then the St. Paul dot Emma dot, it's a long one.
Yeah.
So, yep, copy it into your browser. Yes, feel free to reach out to me to provide written testimony. For verbal testimony, if you want to come and talk, you can do that at the public hearing with Planning Commission on March 29th. That's Friday. We usually meet at 8:30 a.m., so get your coffee. And the two, both ways to provide testimony are fine. One's not, treated more valid than the other. They're equal to provide written or verbal or both, and you can do that. So encourage all folks to do that. But after that whole process, then we will go back and have the opportunity to revise our proposal. And
okay. So March 29th isn't the deadline of that's not when the vote happens. So
No.
what happens after that?
What happens after that is that we take a look at all the public feedback we get through March 29th. So all the written testimony and then the verbal testimony that's given on the date. And we decipher that and determine where do we need to make changes to our proposal based off of what the community said. So we'll do that. Hopefully that just takes a few weeks. And then we'll be back at Planning Commission to present our revised proposal. If they're cool with that, we'll move forward on to City Council. And for City Council, they will also have a public hearing. So
okay.
there are a variety of ways to provide feedback if you want to. And, if everything goes to plan, we're marching toward adoption in June, hopefully. So we'll see. But just depends how many comments we get and what we want to change.
Spencer Miller Johnson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
It's
you,
been a
Sherry
pleasure.
Johnson.
Johnson's unite.
Right.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Oh, those Minnesota Johnsons. There's so many of you guys. Thanks everybody for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you're not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was produced and transcribed by Sherry Johnson and was hosted and edited by me, Ian R. Buck. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.